Welcome to Straight Talk with Carly Alyssa Thorne. And I'm really excited today because today I get to re-interview Dianna Booher. And I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about communication, and this is her 46th book. What more can I say? So welcome.
It's great to be with you again. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
So I love the fact that you do lots of books about communication. So the first thing I'd like to start out with, what was your inspiration behind writing a 46th book on communication?
Well, I think it's because everybody is trying to communicate out there, and it seems that nobody's listening anymore. It's just that the more we do it, the more noise there is out there, the more media there are to carry the message, and it's just more and more and more aggressive, and nobody's listening.
I can actually agree with that because I think there's so much going on with the internet, and we have so much technology out there. You're right. People are talking and not listening. And I think also there's a lot of books out there about communication, except again, once one's been published, it kind of gets put aside and everyone forgets about it. So I think it's really great there are people out there like you who are constantly reminding us how to communicate. So one of the things that you come up with in your book, and it's actually at the beginning of your book, is the challenge of the century is to communicate complex ideas with clarity and civility. So what is the challenge with this in the workplace and even in personal conversations?
Well, I think the reason that it's becomes such an issue is every time we go through a political season, you just see more and more vicious attacks from all corners, all sides. They're trying to get their message heard, but it's kind of like the ante's been upped. People are more vicious in what they say. It's like, I don't care if anything is accurate, I just want to scream louder than the other side. And everybody's wanting to protest what the other person's saying, and you don't know what to believe. There are more and more philosophies introduced, and we're closer. I mean, every country can hear what the other party's saying now. It's not just in our country this or in their country that, but it's just we can communicate from all cultures, and all these different philosophies are competing to be heard, and all different sides, all different messages. And inside a corporation, it's the same thing, and it comes right down to the individual and right down to the family. You're always trying to persuade somebody to do something, change their mind, change their heart, change their action, change their behavior, and it's like what works and what doesn't. How do we get people to settle down and have a civil discussion?
So speaking of civil, one thing I'd love to debunk is the coined phrase all the time of brutal honesty. And you and I have a lot of friends that we know in the speaker industry, and I've always been told, and I always teach my clients, is, and you have it very poignantly pointed in your book about honesty and trust being such a key factor, so we can still be honest and say things without being brutal, still be honest and not have it in a way that we're reacting, getting people to react, because when we're not doing it from a place of non-triggered, if you will, they are going to react. And as you and I both know, there's the terminology that we want people to respond, not react. So right. What is your point of view on this whole brutal honesty?
Well, I think people say things when they say, I just want to tell it like it is, and they have an attitude that still comes through. You can give straight feedback without doing it to hurt someone. It's your intention, and your intention comes through always. But I think that when you enter a conversation and your attitude is to protect feelings rather than give straightforward discussion and hear feedback and collaborate, you're never going to get to the truth. You're never going to resolve an issue. So there has to be that ground level of trust. That's foundational. And if you don't build that culture in your family, and you can have a culture of distrust even in a family, in a small knit group, even among friends. If you don't have people that you run around with, that you associate, if you don't have a foundational trust, you never trust their intention, so that you can't have a straightforward conversation. If you just ask somebody, do you think I should do so and so? Do you think I should go out for that promotion? Do you think I should really tell my boss thus and so? And if you don't trust their intention that they're going to give you what they really think, in other words, if you say, how do you think I did on that presentation? And if they say, oh, you really nailed it. It's a great job. And you think, well, did they tell me that just because I wanted to hear it, or did they tell me that because they don't really want me to get that job? You know, if you just don't know whether to believe them or not, that tells me that you're not on a gut level with them. You don't really trust them, even though you're calling them your friend. So the first thing you have to do in communication is create that culture of trust, and people don't really know how to do that. And there's some steps you have to take to build that, and you don't build it overnight. It takes a while to build that trust. You've got to learn to tell the truth. You've got to be approachable. You've got to have the body language of trust. And some people just turn people off because of their body language. There are just a lot of things that communicate, I don't trust you. And you can't go any further. You can't even talk about word choice. You can't even talk about how you're phrasing things until you get that trust level there.
So let's actually talk a little bit about body language, because you're right. I think body language, what people don't get, is because we're such a visual-oriented culture, that is a huge barrier. And when we're communicating through body language distrust, it's going to be really hard to get people to buy in, if you will, to anything you say, let alone listen, because they're automatically going to shut themselves off and shut themselves down. So let's talk about a little bit where you can give some key pointers on a little bit of what is open body language, instead of this, right, the crossed arms. And like you said, how is it that what are the steps that people would take to actually start developing that culture of trust?
Well, one thing in body language is just when you're about to approach someone, if they seem to be backing away from you, if their feet, if you're standing let's say you're meeting someone in a lobby, or you're about to leave them in a meeting's over, and you're about to walk out, and they're trying to talk to you, but your feet are really pointed away from them. Notice how two people are talking, and one of them, their feet are directly pointed to the person they're talking to, and the other person's feet are a little to the side. That really is, they're saying to you, they're trying to get away. They're trying to escape. And when somebody has a shoulders just slightly turned like this, and they're still talking to you, they're giving you a mixed message. They're saying, I'm trying to carry on a conversation, but I really want to escape. All of those messages subtly ring to that person. They sink into their subconscious. They don't really want to talk to you. They're not really receptive to your message. And if you ask the other person who's maybe asked you a question, maybe it's a subordinate who's asked you a question, did your boss really listen to you? They might not be able to put their finger on it, but what they're thinking is, my boss really didn't listen to what I had to say. She talked to me, but she really wasn't receptive to my message, and they might not be able to explain that. So all of those things matter. The detail choice, the body language, the relevance of the information they gave you, what they didn't say and share with you and pass on, as well as what they did say. So that's kind of step one in persuading someone. And what more can I say? Really focuses on the things that come after, what I've called the 9 laws that come after you build that trust level. If you don't have that, there's no use even starting to try to change somebody's mind or change the way they look at whatever you're trying to persuade them about.
Would you be willing to just actually lay out, not necessarily in detail, but just briefly touch over what those 9 steps are?
Sure. One of them is collaboration versus a monologue. If you think about it, a lot of leaders they do their reasoning in their head, and they think of the pros and cons of an issue, and then they just announce, this is what we're going to do. And then they wonder why people don't adapt and go along. And you have to, if you really want people to be committed to something, you have to let them collaborate. And the reason people don't do that a lot of times is they are afraid to give away credit. And if they collaborate, then they don't get the credit for it. And they don't want to give away ownership. And if you really want people to be committed to an idea, you can't just, throw out something as if it's done. You have to sort of throw out the ingredients to an idea and let people help you bake it. It's got to be a composite. And that's really important, to give people ownership of an idea. That's one thing.
I agree with you in that, because when we give people ownership and we allow them to be partaking in a process, the actual outcomes are much greater. Because, like you said, not only they bought into what we're doing, and I don't even like the word bought into, it's more, to me, it's the whole collaboration and participation. We're going to get a lot of a bigger outcome because of that. And I think it makes people feel like everyone wants to be a part of something. And I think that collaborational piece allows people to feel that.
And some important research that I shared in the book, Zinger Folkman did and shared it in Harvard Business Review article. They surveyed some major clients about at the executive level. Most executives rank themselves as that is their weakest skill in developing their own people and letting them share in the decision making. They like to think about the decision, come to the pros and cons, analyze it, and then just announce it. This is what we're doing. Now, when it gets down to the execution level, they will, let people decide how they're going to do something. But when they come to the major decisions, they often just, this is how we're going to do it, and then are astounded that people don't accept that change. Whereas those companies and those organizations who say, here is the change we're thinking about making, and when those people feel like they have a part in that strategy, it's much more successful. And if you think about in politics and government, that's why you hear often something was leaked. It was leaked on purpose to get the feedback up front, to see what the reaction is, and to get ideas floating around and see on social media what people have to say about it, so that they incorporate some of those ideas. It would be far better, of course, if they didn't have to borrow all those different ideas, but could do it in a more formal way. But that works, however you have to do it to get collaboration.
So what are some more of the other steps?
Well, I think it's a foundational skill as well, and one of the laws is to simplify and call the simple out of the complex. I mean, we're just bombarded now with information, and it's become a core leadership skill to simplify. I mean, just think about it. We have over 1 million apps for the iPhone. We have over 1 million apps for the Android system. We have 259 breakfast cereals. My goodness, there's just so much information out there that to be successful and to be heard, if you could just pick one point going into a presentation and drive that home, if you could just give people fewer benefits instead of, if you're in sales, instead of trying to say, here are 6 benefits of my service or product, and could say, what does this client really need from my product, and really convince them of the one thing that the competitors don't offer, and really drive that one benefit home, you have an advantage. Because they can't walk out of an hour meeting and remember, 15 benefits from your product. That's when it just is overwhelming to them. So simplifying is a key thing.
And I like the fact that in your book you actually show examples. What I love about your book is not only do you actually give steps, but you actually have very thorough examples of what is simplification. So you have a bunch of statements, and you go, like, is this simple, is this not simple? So a lot of people, we can talk about these things, and they're still going, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And so I think I really encourage everyone to actually read the book and actually look through the examples so that you know what is simple and what is not, so you can start refining your language to have things more simple. Because people tune out. The more complicated we make it, they literally tune out. They don't want extra work. They don't want to have to think extra. They just basically want something, okay, this is how it is. This is what I need to do. They want the steps in a simplified form. So I really love the fact that you really, put it on black and white and, ink, that people can actually see what is and what isn't.
Thank
think
you.
it's really important.
Now that you mention that, making things look harder than they really are, I've given some research in there where they actually showed someone who's preparing a recipe, same everything, but they just wrote it in more steps. And they asked, how long do you think it would take you to bake this cake? And people estimated, just because they used a different font that looked complex, or they divided it into more steps, or they used a more complex writing style with the curly cues on it, they estimated it would take almost twice as long to bake the cake. So if your email just looks like it's going to be difficult, and because it's long, or if it looks like the software system takes longer to learn, they're not going to do it. So you've got to make things sound easy and look easy. Document a procedure that they're going to do. It has to look easy on the page. And when you describe it, it needs to sound easy. And sometimes people want to impress you with how intelligent they are by trying to make things sound complex. And it's job security. So you use a lot of gobbledygook and jargon so they sound smart, and it actually just works against them, really.
I actually thought that particular part of the book was actually fascinating about the different fonts. That's one thing I love. I like making graphics and designing, and I'm always very clear on colors and stuff like that. And I agree that when it's really fancy, really fancy writing, it takes away. And actually, the other study that I actually saw, and I don't remember the actual specific name of the study, was not only, like you said, was it more complex for them if it was different font, it took them longer to read it.
Yes. And this carries over into signs in stores. Some of the other research I shared was why restaurants have simplified their menus and actually taken things off of their menu, just having so much on their menu. You can't go through 14 pages. You're sitting there, you're waiting, the waiter is waiting 15 minutes, 20 minutes for you to make up your mind. It's all part of the simplification process. Where if they only have 12 items on their menu, you make up your mind much faster. The profit margin is just much better on those restaurants. It's just fascinating to actually read the research on things that look simple, that are simplified in signage, in how you explain it, when you articulate it, how it's laid out, in the thought processes of how to calculate it, how to describe the price. When you decide how you're going to price it, do you bundle it? Do you offer 50% off the next? This is full price, but it's only 1 cent more if you get the second item. All of that is part of complexity that makes it easy for somebody to do something or not do something. And it comes down to even how you talk to your teen about their after-job school and how you explain how they save for something. It's fascinating to me to read the research.
I always look at it as, would you tell it, like you have a child, and would you put out 20 different outfits from the child to choose from, or 1 or 2? I think we need to start thinking on that level in terms of, like you said, simplifying. Think about your children. If a child can't understand something, right, and then we go to the adult level, yes, we're adults. Then again, like you said, if we're at a restaurant and there's all these pages, we get so overwhelmed and we're like, all this indecision comes into play. So simplifying it back to simple choices, just lay it out simply. And I think if we start thinking more like that, actually how we speak to our children, and I don't mean dumb it down. I'm talking about making it simple. There's a difference between dumbing it down and making something simple, at least in my opinion.
People who will argue the case with you, and they'll say, well, should I actually dumb this down? And that's what they're meaning. It's an arrogant statement. Shall I dumb this down? That's not what we're talking about at all. It is a matter of being clear, and it's a matter of energy. Nobody wants to spend time on trying to decipher what you're saying. They want to be able to spend time on a clear decision. They're not wanting to redo your job. Your job is to go through the research and make the choices absolutely clear. And then when you get to the executive office, they're saying, don't make me redo your research. You do the top three. You decide what the top three options are, and then save me the time and the energy in going through all of that, and give me clear-cut 1, 2, 3 choices. So it's a matter of energy, and let me spend the energy on the complex decision, not the details of that choice.
I'm going to bring up one more point that you brought that was really important there. You said energy. And I think, and also when we talk about the attitude of like dumbing it down, remember that when we're communicating with one another, it's not just body language, and we are visual people. We're also kinesthetic. We feel. So when someone's sensing that you're dumbing it down or having that energy, like you said, behind it, that is also going to repel and also shut somebody down. So that, I think that was a really valid point about energy. A lot of people don't like the word energy because they think it's woo-woo. And we have to understand, it's like when we shake someone's hand and you have that instant feeling like you don't like someone, we all have this inner intuition or feeling, and that is all part of energy. So I think it's really important to remember that. We're multi-sensory people, and that some people are more visual, some people are more kinesthetic, feel, and some people are more auditory, so they're going to be listening differently, and to have all these different cues is everybody's actively looking into those cues from a different perspective.
Absolutely. Another one of the laws that I emphasize in the book is that you never can totally depend on logic to build a persuasive case. You have to appeal to someone's emotion and logic. Now, when you make a decision, are you trying to persuade someone to do something? Obviously, they're going to want to know what is the research behind it, what are the facts, what are the reasons. But what I'm saying is, and what the research shows is, don't ever depend totally on the logic to win the argument, because when people are responding emotionally to something, they can't get past the emotions of a difficult situation to hear the logical arguments. You have to deal with the emotions of a difficult situation first before they can hear the logical argument, before they can hear the pros and cons and move through it. So that's why it's important that you pay attention to both to be persuasive. So the real professional communicator knows that you must appeal to both. That means you need to think what you're trying to move them to do, what goal, what you want to change their mind to do or to say or to believe, to buy, to consider, etc. And you'd think, all right, what metaphor will do that? What analogy will do that? What illustration will do that? And you have to become a master storyteller. Logic, yes, but what will move them emotionally? And when you can do both, then you can be persuasive. You can't just depend on one. And we're not talking about being manipulative, because when you're manipulative, you can pull somebody's emotional strings and be manipulative. You can do that with sinister reasons or intentions. But you can also do that with logic as well by giving them inaccurate facts or inaccurate reasons, invalid reasons. So you need both to be, even if your intention is to lead them to a benefit for them and for all people involved. You just need both to be persuasive.
And you elegantly pointed that out in the book with a quote that says, "A logical case informs but rarely motivates. An emotional appeal persuades." And I think that what you just talked upon is really important, because we do need to realize that we need to get in touch with the other person's feelings to get them into the conversation in a way that they can actually feel. So I think that was a really great point that you made there. We also are talking about, I'd like to get into a little bit about CEOs and senior leaders, and you mentioned a little bit of that, but I want to touch a little more about, you have the law of generalization versus specificity. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, in our day and age, we are always communicating with so many people that's a great temptation. If you think about it, when you post something on Facebook or any kind of social media, or even when you're internally writing in an organization, generally you're writing to one person, but you've got 58 people on your copy list, or you're sending out a meeting announcement. You rarely have a meeting with 2 people. You've got 18 people in the meeting. Because you're writing to so many, you're speaking to so many, the temptation is to say, well, I don't want to get into that detail because it doesn't apply to Joanne, or this doesn't apply to Henry, and you tend to be vague. But vagueness is just begging for people to misunderstand. It just happens. And the more specific, the more chance you have for being relevant for a group of people. It's far better to summarize, and when you summarize, people think, oh, I need to be global in general, and that's not true. Summarize means to give an overview, but you can still be very specific in your overview and very, very concrete. And then if you need to be specific to different groups, then you address those in different ways or different venues. But when you're general, it doesn't apply to anyone, and they tend to tune out. So the more specific, the better. In fact, when I deal with organizations in my client assignments, consulting assignments, the number one reason when we actually drill down on a customer service problem, it is always, almost always, an issue where some customer service agent gave a response or gave a technical answer, and they used a term that was non-specific. It was vague, and the customer had a different meaning for that term. Now, I'll use an example like this. Somebody said, this is on back order, but we can get it in a few weeks, and we will be able to deliver it in no time. And what they meant by a few weeks in their industry might have been 4 to 5 weeks. What the customer meant with their background was a few weeks. Oh, 2 to 3 weeks. So when they don't have it, they're calling up and saying, I don't have it. It's been 4 weeks and it's not here. And of course, the organization that sold that product is saying, I told you before a few weeks. This is just week 4, and you know that's 5 or 6 weeks is typical. And so, see, that was just a miscommunication when they said a few weeks. To one person it meant 2, and another person it meant 5. So almost always there's a problem when you use a vague term that has different meanings. Like, do it as soon as possible. Is that 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks? It's different, means different things, said by different people, to different people, with different urgency.
I also want to clarify one point that I think a lot of people don't tend to understand that can go together. So we were talking about being specific, and we also just talked about a little while ago about being so simplification and simplifying, correct? So can things be, in other words, simple and yet very refined? You know what I'm saying? So some people think that, like you were just talking about, we have to be specific, that when we're specific, that means really lengthy, right? And if it's really lengthy to some people, that means that it's very complex. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, because a lot of people don't understand how you can still be very specific and not have it complicated, and have it, so do you see where I'm going?
Yes, you could say something like, the price of oil in August dipped to 53 barrels in the wells that were treated with the XYZ chemical. That's a very short sentence. It's very specific, and it gives you the price of oil, this chemical, and XYZ chemical in the month. I mean, it tells you very specific details, but it's a very short sentence, about 8 words. I mean, I was just doing that off the top of my head. But 8 words, it's very specific. We know the month, we know the price, we know what product we're talking about and which well. So it doesn't have to be complex. If I were talking to a group of drilling engineers, that would be very appropriate. It's a very specific summary. What I wouldn't want to say is something like this, and this is what people frequently do, since I do a lot of work with the oil and gas industry, to say something like, the price of oil has been dipping sharply in the last few months. Well, you know, what am I talking about? Dipping, how badly, how significant is it, in what wells, since when? Is it affecting in all oil wells, or can we do anything about it? And then if you go on and say, we haven't been able to do anything about it, we've tried treating some of the wells with such and such chemical, but that hasn't helped. You see what wells, what chemical, to what degree, what is the process level. That's still summarizing, but to no effect, because nobody has any specific knowledge, so it's just going to further generate more questions.
The one thing I'd also like to put out there is what I also love about your book is I don't think it's just catered to a business person. You know, I think this book actually reaches out to all populations. You can be a business owner, you can be a mom and dad, it can be, you know, how to communicate in relationships. I think a lot of your tools that you have in your book can really reach out to everybody. Would you not agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the examples I use is about how a mom uses questions to lead her teenage son to not spend all the money he's been making in a apartment and buy a car, but to wait till he graduates so that he can buy a better car. So yes, I try to use examples from parenting, from marriage, from the workplace, because we have to persuade in all different situations. It's not just about business, but if you have to persuade someone, then yes, anytime you need to change somebody's mind or their action. And actually, one of the laws that I really like, and it was the most revolutionary to me when I really started digging into this, is the law about the fact that people average rather than add. If anybody's ever looking for a job, they need to keep this one in mind. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you do your resume, people tend to write down everything that they've done, or if they are making a recommendation to a boss, or somebody next door says, what college do you think that I should apply to? And they tend to say, well, I like this college, or where should I go to vacation? Oh, here's a great ski resort. You'll love it. It has this and this and this. What happens is people try to tell you all the great things about their job or their past or their qualifications. And if you were, you know, ranking things 1 to 10, oh, that's a 10, that's great. Oh, that's a 10, that's great. And then you think, well, this is kind of good, it's not great, and you say, well, that's a 5, that's not really important to me. When the listener or the reader goes through this, they're saying, okay, that's a 10, oh, that's not important, that's an 8, this is a 5. When they get through listening to your conversation or reading your resume or whatever, they'll go through that and say 10, 10, 10, 8, 5. Okay, that's we'll count that recommendation for that ski resort an 8. If they had left off the things that were not so great and just said it has free skiing equipment, they offer lessons for your entire family, no charge. Oh, that's a 10. There's free transportation back and forth to any place you want to go on the whole resort with no charge. Oh, that's a 10, and not told you about anything else. They would have walked away from that conversation saying, let's go there, that's a 10, because they didn't mention any negatives or anything that wasn't important to you. So in other words, saying less and just only the 10s, the most important things, average is all 10s, 10, 10, 10. Same thing for doing your resume. Just mention your 3 best things and you'll come out ahead in that interview rather than mentioning 3 good things and 2 so-so things, because then your average might only be an 8 when the people who interview you start to score your resume or score your interview. So the research says people actually average what they've heard or what they've read rather than add those all together. So again, less or fewer things is better than more.
And I think that goes back to, again, we have so much technology, we get so many emails, we're inundated with things to read. And people have taken speed reading courses, and so people really do tend to skim through things. They actually read through things in a faster manner than they would because they have less and less time, because they're actually, a lot of people overextend themselves. I also would like to go to, because you're actually mentioning job applicants at the moment, you talk about the presenter's paradox. So how does that apply to applicants, and what is the presenter's paradox?
Well, that is... It's tied that and what I was just talking about, the averaging, and it's tied into the idea that we like to risk things rather than focus on potential. And what I mean by this, the research is very widespread in 8 different areas. That is, when you have somebody who's a steady performer over and over and over, they perform well. And then you have somebody who comes in who's sort of a newbie, but they have the potential to do something. We tend to listen and like and prefer to risk the person who might be able to do something. In other words, the research shows, whether you're talking to college students or taking a test, whether you're an artist, whether you're a pro baseball player, we think that it's more exciting to place our money or our time or our risk a new job, giving a new job to somebody who might do well in that situation, who might make us a lot of money, who might put a project on Kickstarter and take our money and might do something better than the one who's been a steady performer. It's just the idea of always thinking that we're ready to gamble on something, so to speak. That potential and reward and the idea that I was just talking to about presenting fewer things. When you present fewer things, it's the idea of adding doesn't always sweeten the pot, doesn't always sweeten the deal. Those two are tied very closely together. So the presenter's paradox, I found very something I could relate to. The way it started, the person who was doing the research on that actually was sitting on an airplane that didn't take off, and it was canceled for some reason, weather or mechanical or whatever, and the airline gave them a little coupon and said, here's $5, call home, make different arrangements, tell them you're not going to make it. And it actually made the person mad. They said, $5, I can't even get my hotel room and change this and call home and whatever. And they were thinking, can you give such a poor reward that you make people mad? I mean, what they meant was this would be a benefit to you, but actually it looks so cheap. It makes you as the airline look so cheap. It's making me angry. And that was the idea. Can you present something in your resume that makes you look so bad that it detracts from your good points? And that ties into what I was talking about potential and achievement. Sometimes, even though you've performed well throughout your career, there's no upside to it. There's no risk. And sometimes people would rather hire the person who hasn't really done anything, but there's the chance that they might. There's the payoff. We just like to gamble. So those two laws that I've discussed in the book and show you the research for are fascinating to me.
I think the overall theme that I keep hearing and I see in myself and the research that I do is that it really boils down to simplification, simplification, simplification. And like you said, highlighting the key points that are the part of your potential of where you need to go. So, and I always tell people also, sometimes you need to tailor a resume to that job. So like you said, don't put on the other stuff that isn't related to the job you're applying for. You may have experience in all this other stuff. Where are you applying? Take the information from your resume that actually applies to where you're applying. So we keep on hearing the same message over and over again, simplification and clarity. And so it's a huge theme right now.
Yes, and relevance. You can't just take a message and send it out to the world. You need to filter for your followers. Make sure that what you're saying is relevant to the people you're talking to.
Now let's get into the law of distortion versus perspective. You say that those who have empathy are often poor negotiators. So how is that so?
Well, if you are always, generally, you want to have empathy and you want to have compassion, but sometimes that's not always good. It's not always good for you to get the best deal, but it's not always good even for the other person. Think about it like this. If you are the parent and your adult child moves back home and they don't want to go out and get a job, they're very well qualified, they're able-bodied, they're healthy, they've got a master's degree or a PhD or whatever, and they've just decided they don't want to work, and you're saying, but I'm empathetic. I for some reason you don't want to work. It would be good for you to be self-sufficient. it would be good for you to learn how to work in this field that you've chosen. And you keep letting them not take responsibility for mistakes. They keep making bad decisions, and they come to you to borrow money, and they keep coming to you to borrow more money, borrow more money. You may have empathy for them, but if you keep covering up for their mistakes and you keep covering up for their bad judgment, they don't learn anything from this. They don't learn anything from that. And so in the long run, you're not really doing them any good. So there are times where empathy, even though you may think you're helping them out, in the long run you're not. And it certainly doesn't put you in the driver's seat in a situation where you need to see other people's point of view. So perspective is about knowing that you're biased, that everybody has their own point of view. You always generally think that you're right. But it's being able to step outside your bias and see a situation from other people's point of view. You see, this is what that person wants and needs, and here's what I really want and need. And I see where maybe a third party, what they want and need. Now, what is the best way for all of us to get what we want? You're listening for common areas where we agree, and common people that we know where there might be a common opportunity to be affiliates on something, to join in a project. But if you're always just empathetic with the other person and go along with what they want or say, that doesn't benefit anybody.
What I'd like to add to that is, I think when some people use the terminology of acquiesce, people can also feel that. So if you're repeatedly acquiescing, or some people even say giving in to, and I've seen this a lot, where people, it's because they're afraid of not being loved, or there's all those under emotional things going on as to why they do that. It does actually repel people, because people actually sometimes do want someone to actually push them a little bit out of the nest, or give them that little kick that they need. So that's an interesting one, because I agree that it is good to have empathy. It's good to be able to feel another person, and we also have to know when there is that boundary of when enough is enough, where you can still feel for someone, however, not do that piece of acquiescing, and you're actually not helping someone in doing that.
They gradually lose respect for you. So even if you are giving them a compliment, they don't believe it anymore. They don't believe what you're saying, because they think, well, I know that I've not done right in this situation, and if you're telling me that it's okay and I'm doing right, I don't believe you about anything anymore.
And I think that goes back to when we started. We're going back to foundational trust, right? So we're constantly, acquiescing or not being honest. That also goes back to, like you said, the losing respect piece, which also goes back to people then losing trust in you. So these are all things I think are really important. That I really do. I think your book is really powerful in, excuse me, pointing out a lot of these points. The other thing I'd like to talk about, because obviously we deal with a lot of business people and sales and marketing people, why would you give some tips for people that are specifically in selling or marketing? How would they be more persuasive?
Well, there are several tips in there specifically for that. One is to make your message personalized. Now, we do that a lot on social media. You add your photograph, you get in touch with people, you try to engage them. But there's simple things like adding a music to what you say if you were putting a message out there. There are things about asking a specific question and listening to what people say, so that if there is an issue, you're inviting their comment on it. There are tips on anchoring a price. Now you're familiar with this. If you go into a restaurant and you see everything on the menu that's relatively $20 for the dinner, but then you see one item that's $40, they think, boy, everything else is great. It's well priced because it's not this expensive item. Or if you see something else that's much lower, and then this 2 or 3 items is higher, and then all of a sudden it's marked down by 50%, you think it's a great deal because everything else is more expensive, even though that's the right price for it. So there's price anchoring. There are all kinds of tips on those issues. One thing I would say is probably the most relevant when you're meeting people face to face as a salesperson, and that is to don't make people duck. And what I mean by that is you have been around people who just you almost hesitate to walk up to them because you know there's going to be a pitch in there somewhere. No matter what venue it is, 30 seconds into it, a minute into it, they're going to be saying, well, what I really do is blah, 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 blah. Do you need that? Or can I come by and see you? Or here's my business card. There's just no downtime. They're always pitching you on something. So what you want to do as a salesperson, of course, is to learn how to let people know what you do in some way, but not always be selling. You know, way back 30 years ago, there was always that line, always be closing, but you don't want to do that. I mean, that's long past and long gone to always be closing. Instead, be helpful. Be helpful to people. Connect people. And those are some of the tips. And I would say, too, even when you give a sales presentation, to pick a point and not start. I know when I coach people in sales presentations, people tend to start with, here's all about us. And they tell you all about the company, or they introduce if they brought 2 or 3 other people with them on the sales call, they'll tend to introduce people around the room. You know, here's Joe Schmo over here, he does such and such, and there's Sally, Smith over here, and here's what she does. And your client is sitting there like, I don't care. What I care about is me. You know, what are you going to do for me? Here's my, I invited you in to tell you, or for you to tell me what you could help me do and what problem you can help me solve. So it's a huge mistake that salespeople make all the time. So when we coach them about putting together a sales presentation, start where the client is. What do they want to know? Answer the question for them. And then they'll be interested in finding out about you, and are you capable of delivering what you said you could do.
So you bring up 2 really important points. One is we'll go back to questions hook the mind, and in other words, and also that when we ask questions, we're going to get the relevant information we need to find out what the person needs so we can actually then tailor something towards them. And the other thing I would like to actually, let's go to that one first, because I think questions are so important in developing. So the other point to the connection there is, as you were saying, not the sales pitchy, is building rapport and building a relationship with people. And once they actually, when you build that relationship, and then as you said, they get to know what you do and what your services are, and you ask the questions, then you are going to get business. It's kind of a backwards way of doing it and counterintuitive to some people. And I know you understand what I'm talking about. So why don't you explain a little bit about why it's so important to ask questions and develop that relationship to then create business from that?
Well, I think it's just because the whole world is pitching. You know, the whole world is saying, listen to me, listen to this political campaign, listen to this ad, listen to this post, read this post. It's just everybody is throwing things at you. And people just have up this guard. Think when you go out to shop. You walk into a store and people say, may I help you? May I help you? May I help you? And what do you say? You respond, no thanks, I'm just looking. Even if 2 minutes later you say, could you help me? I'm looking for... I mean, it's just your defense is up. No, thank you. I'm looking. And then you say, I need your help. We just have our guard up because we're tired of people throwing information at us. So what puts the guard down is asking questions. And when you ask someone a reasonable question, not a silly question, not something that you should have looked up yourself and have known, but something that they're really interested in, then it demonstrates interest. And it shouldn't be a generic question that everybody gets asked, or something that sounds practiced or artificial, but something that you know is unique to that person. Then that lets them know that you care enough about them.
So finally, I mean, you and I have gone back and forth. I've interviewed before, and I really do love your writing style. I love the way that you really lay things out for people and give examples. What are some final key points that you'd like to leave with the audience on how they can persuade people and build those relationships of trust?
I think that they have to speak to the heart. I think that they cannot just put together a generic message that speaks to everybody in a group. I don't care if it's everybody in your department, everybody in your staff, even sometimes everybody in your family. Because even if you have 4 people in your family, they have different personalities, and you have to talk to them individually. I know even my daughter, when she has a, quote, family meeting and they're talking to the 4 teenagers about something, many times she will meet with them one-on-one and deliver a message. Even if it's we're going on a vacation and we're going to do this and so, she'll talk with them one-on-one to get their input about this trip or their vacation. Which would you rather do? Because they're at different ages. The 10-year-old doesn't want to do the same thing that the 12-year-old wants to do, or the same thing that the 14-year-old, and they'll have different interests. Now, she might want to all lead them to go to the same place because that's the place that, that's the budget, and that's where she wants them to go, and she might have 2 alternatives. But there are different things that they would be interested in, and so she's going to pitch different things about those 2 sides that they might like and get their input. So whether you're talking family or you're talking about a 10,000 employee corporation, you've got to speak to people's heart. It has to be specific, and it has to be relevant to them.
And what would be some final tips that you just might have, that we have not discussed, because we've gone over a lot of things, and I obviously sometimes may not ask you something that you may want to deliver. So is there anything I have not touched upon that you feel that would be really important for people to know about?
I think that also you have to remember that simple, when we talked about simple a lot, simple doesn't necessarily mean short. Simple means clear. And the way you demonstrate the fact that you know what you're talking about has to do with not just length, but it has to do with the structure, it has to do with your word choice, and it also has to do with relevance. So think about before you speak, what am I saying to this person? What's the message of interest to them? How should I structure this message? What will be their objection to it? How will they use what I'm going to say? And what will be their input from it and their reaction to it, and shape the message accordingly. Don't make it about you, but make it about them. I know we've heard that, but sometimes we don't think about it when we first speak.
Thank you so much for joining me once again. It's been a delight having you again. I really value the resources you put in books for people. It really gives them a ton of ahas and resources. So since this is a podcast, can you please let people know where they can find your website and find out all about you?
Sure. It's What More Can I Say, thebook.com, and then the main website is BooherResearch.com. And I might should spell that since most people can't understand exactly the last name. It's Booher, just like Booher. I hope they don't do that. Booher, BooherResearch.com.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you again, and I really look forward to further conversations, and I'm sure since you are such a wonderful writer that I know there'll be more books.
Sure. Thank you. I love being with you.
You're welcome. So I really enjoyed having everyone with me, and you've been with your host, Carly Alyssa Thorne, and you can find me at CarlyAlyssatHorne.com. Have a great day, everyone.